He refused efforts to release Nelson Mandela. This is Ronald Reagan. And to this day, many of the people alive, Dick Cheney, for example, was of those who opposed the ANC and considered Nelson Mandela to be a terrorist. This is Dick Cheney, who was our vice president. Back in the early 80s, the same people who are now spouting forth their praise and their accolades, 20 years ago, these same people were against this man. But, my dear brothers and sisters, what do we learn from this? The truth shall prevail. The truth and justice shall prevail. That in the end, it doesn't matter what people label you. If you are standing up for that which is right, mankind must be acknowledging eventually that that was right. Allah Azza wa Jal has says in the Quran that the haqq and the batil, when they clash together, the haqq shall always win, even if it takes some time. But the haqq will eventually win over the batil. And there is no doubt that in this particular battle, don't bring theology, and we're not saying Nelson Mandela was a mujahid fi sabilillah. We are saying Nelson Mandela stood up and struggled for that which is right, which is decency, dignity. Black and white, there should be no difference between them. We all know this to be true. And Nelson Mandela stood up for that. And he fought, and he suffered like hardly anybody has suffered. More than a quarter of a century put in jail. And he did not sign any paper to excuse himself. He did not apologize because he could not apologize for the truth. And perhaps, my dear brothers and sisters, perhaps the respect that mankind has given him is his reward from Allah Azza wa Jal, because Allah gives that respect. Allah gives that love. Genuine love coming out, genuine respect coming out. Acknowledgement of the nature of this man. Why is it that all of mankind, by and large, looks up to this person in our time? Perhaps this is his reward. And as for the akhirah, we leave it to Allah. As we said, we don't speak of the akhirah. But there is no denying that being famous and respected and loved is a gift from Allah. تُعِزُّ مَن تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَن تَشَاءُ. And this man, Allah had given him izzah on this earth. And this shows us, my dear brothers and sisters, that we as Muslims, he didn't even believe in our religion, yet he did what he did. Should we not be ashamed of believing in our religion and not doing a fraction of standing up for the truth, of speaking out against injustice? Let the people call us what they will. Eventually the truth shall win over the batil. We see it in our own lifetimes. And also one more point here that I really have to bring in. And that is that the anti-apartheid movement of South Africa, which Nelson Mandela was one of the leading figures of, many of us do not know that the Muslims were very much involved in the anti-apartheid movement. They were an integral part of the anti-apartheid movement. And when Nelson Mandela was invited to Oxford, Oxford has a center for Islamic studies, and Nelson Mandela was invited to open that center. And he came in 1995-97, and he says, and I quote from his speech, and I'm quoting from Nelson Mandela here, "I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to those South African Muslims who died while in detention because of their resistance to apartheid. Babla Saluji, Imran Haroon, Ahmed Timol, and Dr. Hussein Hafaji. They represent the involvement of the Muslim community in the struggle for justice and freedom, as does the presence of Muslims as ministers and in the highest office of our judiciary in the new democratic political dispensation of our country." End quote. In other words, Nelson Mandela is saying that I honor those Muslims who also were fighting on our side, and this was a fight that Muslims should have gotten involved in, and they did get involved in, because Muslims were not only suffering themselves as second, third class citizens, but they're fighting for the truth, and that is freedom for all, justice for all, equality for all. And what happened when the Muslims stood up for this racist regime, and they fought hand in hand with those who were struggling? The Muslims of South Africa are, in my humble opinion, the most respected and honored Muslims of the Western world by their governments. I have traveled far and wide, and I have been to South Africa, and I have not seen any Western society, I'm not talking about the Eastern, Western societies, where the Muslims are more beloved to the people and more respected by their governments than the Muslims of South Africa. And one of the main reasons, and the Muslims of South Africa are not a massive quantity, they're like us, 2-3%, like the rest of the Western world. Every Western country, 1-2-3% Muslims. South Africa is the same. It's not as if there's 20-30% Muslims there. They're same, 2-3%, 4%. But they stood up and they fought for that which was right. And because of that, the people acknowledge these people are righteous people. And they have now a place in their faith in society, so much so that many of you might not know this, but the ambassador of South Africa to America, the ambassador of South Africa to America is a practicing Muslim, praying 5 times a day, avoiding alcohol, bearded, mashallah, tabarakallah, quoting the Quran when he gives lectures. I have heard him myself many times. A righteous man, and نحسبه كذلك ونزكي الله عدا. He seems to be a good man, believing in Allah and His Messenger. Now, South Africa could have appointed anybody, especially to the most honorable ambassadorship in the whole world, and that's to America. But they wanted to appoint somebody who was qualified for the job, and the person they appointed fought in the anti-apartheid movement. He was jailed because of this. He was a part of the ANC. He was a part of the Nelson Mandela movement. They couldn't care about his religion because he's walked the walk along with talking the talk. And this leads me to my final point, my dear brothers and sisters. We should compare ourselves here in America with that reality of South Africa. The fact of the matter is that most of us here have not done the types of struggles, the types of standing up for truth and justice, that society then will look at us and say, oh, these are a people, they stand up for their values and principles. Most of us, we live isolationist lives. We just worry about ourselves, my house, my children, my masjid. And we don't realize that poverty, racism, crime, drugs are not Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist problems. They're problems of society. All of us are in the same neighborhood. When crime goes up, I go down and you go down. When alcoholism, when drug abuse goes up, we all suffer. When immorality spreads, my children also suffer. And we don't seem to realize, my dear brothers and sisters, that if we want our theology, our faith, our religion to be respected, to be acknowledged, we need to also be a part of this society, like the Muslims were in the anti-apartheid movement, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was in his own city of Mecca. Hilf al-Fudul and so many other things that he did. He demonstrated he has a love for the society. He has a care for the people. Then when he starts preaching what he preaches, the people will listen to him. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, much has been said, much more can be said. The bottom line, a person that the world respected has recently died. Allah knows his affairs, but wallahi, in his life and times, in his struggles, there is much benefit we can find in our own religion for what we can